Hello and good afternoon, all the people here again, and welcome to another session of Asset Colloquium. We are here to listen from a very renowned writer who has published his first book. As you can see here, it is titled Rest in Peace, USD. Mr. Shanmuganathan Nagasundaram. Well, it's a South Indian name, so if I made some mistakes in pronouncing, I'm sorry for that. He has very vast writing experience. He's been publishing in international journals and things for 15 years on topics of economics and other stuffs and all. His academic background is alumnus of IIT-BHU in mining engineering and IIM-Lucknow from late 90s. And after which he had a nearly decade-long career in Infosys and working in Northern America and Europe, where he's a consultant and also for the things. And since last 15 years, he is back here in India and of course, busy as an economic columnist and investor for the last 15 years. And he has published a lot of articles on newsletters, including Free Market, the Gold Standard, and Federal Reserves. He predicted 2008 housing bubble crisis, and through this book, he is predicting even bigger crisis, which we all going to face in next 2 to 3 years. And he wrote a book about it, and people can raffle through if they want to. The copy of it is kept here on the table. And he's here to discuss his book and give us an overview of it. And there is a slight change in the pattern of why this asset colloquium will be conducted today. He will make a presentation for 30 minutes, and then the last 30 minutes will be open up as an interactive session where you can have whatever questions you might have faced and things. Rather than a standard one-to-one question answer session, which we used to have normally, which will happen for the last 5 minutes, but the remaining 20 minutes will be more open up and discussion of ideas and things like that. So people can participate and things like that. So without further ado, I request Shantanu to please come.
Thank you, Paragji. Am I audible to all of you? Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks for taking the time on a Friday evening to come and listen to at this lecture. I'll start by asking a question. This is a very extremely controversial idea. I can't think of too many guys in India who have written about this, spoken about this. So how certain am I about the outcome that I forecasted here? Right? And there are two parts to that particular question. The first is RIP USD. I'm saying the US dollar is going to die. About that particular event itself, I'm like 99% certain it's going to happen. Okay. And the second part is the timeline. I put there 202x, which is it's going to happen in the next 5 years. How certain am I it's going to happen in the 5 years? Okay, maybe about 80% probability. If you can extend that 5 to 10 years, I would be 99% certain about that also. I'm reasonably sure it's going to happen this decade. Okay, but if I'm wrong, it's going to happen in the next few years after that. Okay, so that's the only doubt that I have in my mind. Otherwise, this is an event that's going to happen with an extraordinarily high probability. Okay, so I'll just start with a few basic questions. Right, there are 4 schools of thoughts in economics. Okay, does somebody here have a background in economics? Okay, good. So, can you tell me what's a far left school in economics is called as? Okay, communism. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, Marxism is the equivalent economic philosophy of that. Okay, and then left of center, you have got something known as the Keynesian School of Economics. This is what is taught in 99% of the schools worldwide. Everybody believes this to be true, okay, but it's not, as I'll explain to you today. And then right of center, you've got something called as a monetary school. Our former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan loosely subscribes to this particular idea. And then you have a far right school called the Austrian School of Economics. Now, this was the school of economics that the world started with. Adam Smith, if I'm sure all of you would have heard his name, he subscribed to this particular philosophy. Right? Now, for each of these 4 economic philosophies, okay, there's an equivalent political philosophy. Okay, and for Marxism, it's called communism. And for Keynesian economics, they call us liberals. And then the conservatives are the people who are there for the monetary school of thought. Okay, can somebody name what is the far right political philosophy known as? No, capitalism is an economic school. The equivalent political philosophy is called as libertarianism. If you again go and study the history of the US, all of the founding fathers of the US economy, all of them were hardcore libertarians. Okay, they actually believed in a very limited form of government. Okay, so what is this Austrian school of economics actually describe? How is it different from the other schools of thought? One is, it actually prescribed a very limited role for the government. It said the government should restrict itself to doing only two things. Okay, one is protection of private property, okay, which is to have the army and the police, and then enforcement of contracts, okay, which is to have your courts and justice system. So these two were recognized as the only legitimate functions of the government. And the second aspect of this Austrian school of economics is to have a sound money system, which is to say that gold is the only form of money that should circulate within a society. These two are the defining facets of a capitalistic society. Now, people think of US as a capitalistic system today. It was true. It was a capitalistic society from the founding years of 1789 up till about 1900, 1920. After that, it has long ceased being a capitalistic society because it doesn't have these two roles anymore. Okay, but still people think of US as a capitalistic system, but it's not anymore. Okay, so from barter to a monetary system, all of you will be aware that as and when civilization started, or when agriculture started, okay, this is about 8000 BC, we started with a barter system, okay, wherein people used to exchange goods directly. It should be obvious that barter is a very extremely restrictive form of transactions, and it has various limitations to it. How did we overcome the system of barter? We started using a medium of exchange, wherein as and when you wanted to sell something, okay, you would sell it and then take that medium of exchange. And when you wanted to buy something, okay, you could give that medium of exchange and then buy whatever you wanted to do with it. This medium of exchange is what we call as money. Now, what are the attributes of a commodity that can serve as money? Okay, so there are 5 properties. It should be desirable, it should be durable, and should be divisible, convenient, and consistent. The first property, okay, that's the most important one, which is desirable, which is when something is a medium of exchange, you ought to be sure that everybody would accept it. So people should have very high level of desirability, or they should have a utility for that particular commodity that serves as the purpose of money or the medium of exchange. So we have used hundreds of commodities as money, and it was a trial and error process through which we standardized on gold and silver. But the first object that served this purpose of money was actually wheat, and this was around 7000 BC. Why did we standardize on wheat? And that was because we were transitioning from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle onto an agrarian society. So the commodity that was in short supply at that particular point in time was wheat. So so the markets actually chose wheat as a commodity because everybody knew that people will accept wheat. Okay, nobody's going to say no to wheat. So what you wanted to sell, you could sell it and take wheat. And you know that what you want to buy, you can always give that person wheat, and they'll also accept it. So it was this desirability that's the single most important criteria. So although I've defined 5 criteria, the singularly most important one is the first one, desirability. So from wheat, we actually shifted to iron and copper, say around 4000 BC. Why did this transition happen? And that's because of the other properties. Wheat is not durable. You can store it for 6 months, 12 months, 1 year, 2 years, okay, but it's going to rot over a period of time. So people shifted from wheat to iron and copper. And again, from iron and copper, we shifted to gold and silver around 2800 BC, again, for the very same reasons. Iron and copper, you can keep it for 5 years, 10 years. As compared to gold, you could keep it for thousands of years. You could drop a bar of gold at the bottom of an ocean floor, and after 1000 years, it will still exactly be the same. Right? It is extremely durable that way, and it's also divisible. You could divide gold into 0.001 gram. It will still retain all its properties, and you can put it back together. Will be the same as compared to a diamond. If you just cut it into half, it actually loses its entire desirability. So gold is extremely divisible that way. It's extremely convenient. You store a huge amount of value like in a very small space. You could buy a house in most parts of the world for as little as 10 kgs of gold. Okay, this was true about 100 years back, and this was true 200 years back, and it's and it's still true today. Okay, and it's very consistent, which is that each piece of gold is exactly the same as another piece of gold. Like it doesn't matter where it was mined, milled, and put together. Every piece of gold is very consistent with another piece of gold. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask me. I'll just touch upon Bitcoin. Okay, now Bitcoin is touted as an alternative to gold. Okay, but it's not the case, and that's because there is no utility to Bitcoin. There's nothing that you can do with a Bitcoin. Okay, with gold you can do hundreds of things. There's like massive utility to gold. All of your latest electronic equipments has a small piece of gold in it because it has very high conductivity. Okay, and it doesn't react with other properties at all. In comparison, if you look at Bitcoin, there is nothing that you can do with a Bitcoin. So it does not satisfy the attributes of money. So I don't think it's money. Okay, so till what point in time in history did gold serve the purpose of money? Okay, can somebody answer this question? Early? Who said that? I mean, can you throw up your hand? Yeah, okay. Oh, okay, he's right. Gold served this purpose of money up till August 15, 1971, right? What is the change that happened? Up till 1971, a dollar actually represented a fixed unit of gold, in the sense that if a Federal Reserve had to issue a dollar note, they need to keep an equivalent ounce of gold there. So this ratio between gold and the dollar was defined as $35 to an ounce. So for every $35 note that was issued by the Federal Reserve, they needed to keep an ounce of gold, and it was convertible at this fixed ratio. So if you had to buy a car on August 14th, and if it costed something like $3,500, it is tantamount to saying that you paid 100 ounces of gold, okay, to get this car. And what happened after that? Nothing. 2 days after that, it was just pieces of paper. This convertible or this fixed ratio that existed between gold and silver for 200 years up to that particular point in time, okay, went away on August 15th. And what happened on August 15th? That was something called as a gold window. And Richard Nixon closed his gold window on that. And when he closed it, he said they're temporarily closing it. Of course, they have never gone back to actually reinstating that convertibility, okay, between dollar and gold. Any questions? Okay. So what do you think will happen when you remove this convertibility? So what will happen? Yeah, correct. So because this convertibility was removed, you had a huge expansion of the size of government, of the amount of money in circulation. And that's what happened, right? If you look at till August 15, 1971, it actually took 200 years, okay, for the US dollar, for the US government's national debt to hit the first trillion, okay, from 1789 till about, and the first trillion was achieved in 1981 to 1982. Today, they add $1 trillion every 100 days. Okay, so the pace of the increase in national debt or the size of government has dramatically picked up after closing this gold window, and that was a change that happened. And even as a percentage of the GDP, I mean, people always say that you should not look at the national debt in isolation. Okay, but in the context of the size of the economy, but even in the context of the size of the economy, it has skyrocketed. Okay, next in the book, I take up 3 topics. First is money, and the second one is interest rate, and the third is inflation. And I actually explain what these 3 things mean. I'm not going to touch upon interest rates here simply because I don't have the time. Okay, but I explain what money is and how it's different from currencies. Money and currencies are 2 different things. Currencies have value when it's backed by money, which is only gold and silver. Okay, in the absence of that backing, okay, currency's intrinsic worth is 0. Okay, so that's the difference between money and currency. I just want to touch upon inflation. Okay, can somebody define inflation for me? Okay, cost of living increases. the cost of goods going up. Okay, so I mean, this is the most accepted definition of inflation today. It's an increase in the general price level, in the general price levels of a basket of goods and services. Okay, can somebody have an alternate definition for it? Yeah, currency value is decreasing. I mean, that's one way to look at it. Okay, but it's stating the same thing. If you actually go back and look at a Webster's dictionary that was written in the 1800s, or if you read some of Hemingway's book, they'll define inflation as a very different phenomenon. They'll say inflation is an increase in the supply of money and currency. That was all the definition of inflation was. I've actually said undue expansion or increase or overuse from currency, of the currency. So inflation earlier on was defined as an expansion in the supply of money. That was all the definition of inflation was. And it's valid if you think about it. I say in the context of prices, okay, you don't say prices inflate, right? We say prices increase, prices decrease, prices go up, prices come down. We don't say prices inflate. What inflates is the supply of money, right? So this was the definition of inflation, and it was extremely well understood up till the 1950s and 60s also. Okay, then the definition of inflation was changed in the 1950s to state that an increase in the supply of money, uncredited, causing the prices to go up. So this change happened in the 1960s, and 20 years after that, they dropped the causal effect. And today we talk about inflation only as an increase in the price levels of goods and services. Okay, why do you think they did that? Pardon?
We check how much currency is being printed.
Right.
Inflation rate will be
much higher. That's one part. Okay, but the more important part is, okay, today, when you ask a government as to why are prices going up, okay, they would blame the weather, they'll blame the war, they'll blame the floods, etc., etc. But the only reason why prices go up is because the government is printing its money. If they don't print money, okay, prices will not go up. For 120 years under the gold standard that the world was in, prices declined. Prices declined in that 120-year period. Prices were down by about as much as 50% in that particular period. And this is despite the phenomenal growth we had. If you look at the period from 1800 to 1920, when we were on the true gold standard, we transitioned from horse and bullock carts onto trains, onto cars, onto planes. Most of the innovations other than the internet that you can think about today, everything happened under the gold standard, and this happened in conjunction with falling prices. Okay, but after we moved off the gold standard and then got this Federal Reserve in place, prices have been going up continuously, and the only reason why prices go up is that governments do not actually live within their means. And why is that the case? Okay, governments have three sources of revenues. Okay, one is they can tax, but there's a limit on how much they can tax. If they actually increase the tax rates too much, people will protest, or they might even stop working. Two, they can borrow from the market. But the worst part is they have to repay that borrowing. Three, they can print the money. Okay. What are the consequences of actually printing the money? Okay, prices go up. But they can always blame the prices going up on weather and floods. People really don't understand the sequence, or they don't correlate these two things. So the only reason why prices go up is that the government is living beyond its means, and that is inflation. Sure.
The supply side also play a role. For example, let's say that I want onions, but onions are not in supply. So
okay, it's a good question. So let me take an example where you have a flood and the crops are destroyed, right? And so the food is in short supply, and so the price of food items should go up. That is the question that you're asking, right? But inflation does not refer to a particular commodity. It's a basket of goods and services, right? So if you have floods and then the quantity of rice goes down, what it will mean is that the price of rice goes up, okay, but the price of petrol will go down, the price of services will go down. So as a basket, it will still remain the same. And that is because the amount of money is fixed. Okay, to that extent, something goes up, something else has to go down by definition. And that's the reason for that 120 years and the gold standard. Like, it's not that you didn't have wars, you didn't have floods, and like we had huge famines, okay, but prices fell continuously, right? It's only after we get the Federal Reserve in place, prices start going up. And that's because the supply of money goes up. So the price of goods and services going up is because of inflation. Of a single item, you could have various factors going in. Okay, but inflation refers to the basket of goods and services and not that of an individual item. So what is inflation? So we have to distinguish between the cause and the effect. Okay, monetary inflation is a supply of the actual amount of money and credit within a system, and price inflation is the price of a basket of goods and services going up. We have to distinguish between these two things so that we know what is causing it. So the cause is monetary inflation and the result is price inflation. Again, this is a point that I've repeated. So cycles of monetary inflation. This is what has been happening for the last, I would say, 50 years, right? So what is happening is governments print a lot of money, and then with a lag, prices go up. As and when prices go up beyond a limit, okay, they are forced to actually like increase the interest rates, okay, which causes a kind of slowdown in the demand. So for a temporary period, you have a slowdown in the rate of inflation. Like it's not that the prices fall. It is that the rate of increase in prices goes down. So instead of prices going up at 10-15%, it actually goes up at 5-6%, right? And then they have another cycle of monetary inflation. So this goes on continuously, and over a period of time, okay, we see that the currencies lose most of their value. Now, if you look at the US dollar, it was $35 to an ounce in 1971. In that 50 years, today it's at 2,600 or thereabouts. It has lost 99% of its value, okay, like in this 50-year period. Now, if you look at the rupee to the dollar, the rupee was something like $4 to a rupee, but it's actually 4 to the dollar like in 1947. At this particular point in time, we are at 85. Okay, so we have lost about 99% of the value against the dollar in this particular period. Okay, so the rupee against gold, we have lost 99.9% of the value, okay, since we got independence. That is the extent of debasement or the fall in the value of the Indian rupee since we got independence. And this causes what I call as a boom-bust cycle, okay, which is you have an artificial boom caused by low interest rates. And then as and when the central banks are forced to increase the interest rates, okay, this causes a bust. And we see the cycles happening repeatedly. I've taken the US example here. The first one was the NASDAQ boom, okay, where the Fed artificially lowered the interest rates. But let me talk about interest rates a bit before I actually explain this. Okay, what are interest rates? Can somebody define that for me?
Rates which
No, Debu, you should have read my book by now, so you can't give this wrong answer. Okay. Okay, so interest rate is a price of borrowing money. Okay, so let me take a very simple example, such as an article like a car or a tomato. Okay, you have suppliers who actually produce these commodities, and then you have got buyers who actually want these commodities. The price is a meeting point at which the supply actually meets a demand. Say, for example, if I fix the price of tomato at about 20 rupees, okay, that's a meeting point at which the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. Assume all of the producers say, no, it's actually too low a price. Okay, we want a price of 30. So if the artificially fixes price of tomatoes at 30, what it means is that the supply at this 30 is substantially higher as compared to the demand at this particular price. So you're going to have a supply that is going to rot. Or say the opposite situation where the government says, no, people can't afford 20, you have to sell it at 10. Then what happens is the demand is substantially higher as compared to the supply at this particular price. So you're forced to ration. So this price mechanism is the market adjusting mechanism, or what is called as the invisible hand of the free markets that automatically adjust the supply and the demand. The same thing happens with money. Interest rate is a price at which the supply you get from savings is equal to the demand that you get from the borrowers. You have a set of people who save money, and you have a set of people who actually borrow money. This interest rate is this price adjusting mechanism as far as money is concerned. This is the rate at which the supply equals the demand. Okay. So as and when the central banks set the interest rate at a level lower than what this natural rate the market will set it at, what it actually means is that the supply is actually lower as compared to what the market demand is. So you have an artificial boom that is happening, and this causes an actual increase in the in the price of goods and services, which is inflation that I explained before. So because of this increase in the price inflation, the governments are forced to increase the interest rates. And this causes that artificial boom to bust. And we saw that happening with the NASDAQ boom, wherein the Fed had actually set the interest rates at 3%. Okay, as and when the bubble started growing, okay, they had to like increase the rates, and this led to the bust. After it led to the bust, again they started on a cycle of easing, and that led to the 2008 GFC. As and when this bust, again they had to lower the interest rates. Now, this 2008 GFC, I'm sure all of you remember that, that was caused by a 1% interest rates for 2 to 3 years. If a 1% interest rate for 2 to 3 years can cause a GFC, what do you think 15 years of a 0% interest rate can cause? Right? We have a massive bubble on our hands. Okay. The first is the interest rate that I've explained. If you look at the national debt, that's the last one. Okay. From 2000 to 2008, there was not much of an increase in the national debt, about a 33%. But today, we have had almost a 4x. National debt has quadrupled. If you look at the money supply, okay, the statistics is even worse. So the amount of monetary inflation that has happened subsequent to the 2008 GFC is unprecedented. Okay, the world has never seen this level of monetary expansion ever. So what is the effect? We have bubbles everywhere. If you look at the housing bubble in the US today, in comparison, 2008 bubble looks puny. Okay, this is a much bigger bubble as compared to the 2008 bubble. The prices are up almost 100% as compared to the 2008 bubble. So why is this happening? Because as and when the Federal Reserve or a government creates money, okay, there are 3 avenues for the money to flow into. Okay, first is it can flow to the financial assets of stocks and bonds, or it can flow into real estate, or it can flow into commodities. Now, as and when it flows into stocks, bonds, and real estate, there is a feeling of euphoria in the markets. People don't think of it as inflation. It is still just inflation. It is just excess supply of money. If you adjust the price of stocks and bonds on gold as compared to the nominal dollars or the rupee, okay, this value won't go up at all over long periods of time. So this monetary like inflation is actually reflecting in higher price of stocks, higher price of bonds, higher price of real estate. We confuse that with growth. It's not growth, it is just monetary inflation. Okay, but when it flows into the third asset class, which is commodities, that is when we actually start feeling the pinch. Okay, we start complaining. And this flow from monetary inflation to price inflation does not happen linearly. There could be huge lags, actually huge lags spanning 15-20 years also, as we have seen in the last 15 years. Now, if you look at this chart shows the relative valuation between stocks, bonds, and commodities, and we are at a historic low. Okay, this is an unprecedented low level, if you ask me. And although the price of dollars is, if you look at the price of gold, it's actually $2,600 to an ounce today. This, if you adjust for the monetary inflation, is lower than the $35 that was there in 1971. Okay, that is the amount of dollars that's been circulated, that's been created in the interim. Okay, so at this particular point in time, you will have a busting of the bubble, and if the Federal Reserve tries to do what it did in 2008, okay, which is to stimulate by going to a 0% or by doing QE, this is like throwing gasoline on price inflation. Okay, prices are going to skyrocket. So this is a government numbers. If this were a private listed company, I'm sure all of you like invest in stocks, you will not touch this company with a 10-foot pole. Okay, it is as bankrupt as you can possibly get. At this particular point in time, the US government is actually spending 25% of their revenues just on the interest component of the debt they hold. In the next 2 years, I think it's going to touch 50%. And this is when the interest rate on the national debt is just about 3%. As when it goes to 4%, 5%, okay, this number is going to skyrocket. And it is a Ponzi scheme even today, okay, but it's going to become obvious to everybody as and when actually reaches 30, 40, 50% numbers. And this is just the accounted portion of the US government debt, which is just 35, okay, which is just $35 trillion. Okay, they have an unaccounted portion, which is your social security, etc., for which they have collected money from the people. That is 200 trillion. Okay, so the US government has been running a Ponzi scheme for a very long time. And all this was true for a long time. Okay, but now it's getting very obvious to the market. So what is going to happen in the next few years? So at this point, you have three bubbles: the stock market bubble, and you have a housing bubble, and a bond bubble. If you ask me, the bond bubble is the biggest. People are going to lose more than 99% of their money if they put it into bonds. Stocks and houses, you may not lose so much. Okay, bonds is like absolute guaranteed disaster at this particular point in time. Okay, one of these bubbles is going to burst first. I don't know which one. Okay, but soon it okay, like a pack of dominoes, all three are going to fall one after the other. All bonds, including US government bonds. Yeah. Okay, the Fed is going to do the same thing that they actually did after 2008, which is QE, etc., etc. And this is going to actually cause the consumer price inflation to go up dramatically. Okay, in the worst case, you can have hyperinflation in the US dollar. At this point, I think it's a probable outcome. I wouldn't say high probability. Okay, but at least a 50% chance at this particular point in time. Okay. Now, we are going to have plenty of wars as part of this also. I'm sure the US government will want to distract the people from actually understanding what is happening. And the easiest way is to start wars. And we've been seeing that happening in the last few years. Okay, so what is the road ahead? It's an absolutely hopeless situation for the US government. If you ask me, there's nothing that they can do about it. Okay. But if you actually look at what the US founding fathers advised as to what the role of the government should be, they were very, very clear about this. And I've just put some statements. If you look at the first statement by Thomas Jefferson, he argued against the government having the power to borrow at all. He said we should remove this concept of national debt. The federal government should not be able to borrow. They have to live within what they actually earn through taxes. The second, they argued heavily against having a central bank. They did not want a central bank at all. Even if you look at the Federal Reserve, that's the only central bank that doesn't have bank as part of its name. And that's because the government tried forming a central bank twice and it was shot down by the people. Okay, so the third time they did it, okay, they did it in a very surreptitious manner. And the Federal Reserve was not even instituted as a central bank. But over a period of time, it kind of acquired powers. And third one, they're very clear that they wanted only gold and money, gold and silver circulating as money within the system. They were against the concept of paper currencies because they understood the consequences so well. If you give a government any kind of power to print money, they'll abuse it. So they didn't want this power at all. They wanted only gold to circulate as money. So these were the advice of the founding fathers. So the US has to go back to it. Now, I don't think they'll go back to it voluntarily. It'll be forced upon them through the markets. Sooner or later, at some point, for whatever the US is actually importing, they'll have to pay through some other currency other than the US dollar. And that is going to be the point at which they realize that the game is over. I don't think the day is very far off. And I've explained a few things in the book. I think BRICS will be the first currency that will actually get a gold backing. I think it'll happen in the next 2-3 years, and they'll start selling oil using the BRICS currency. That is a point that is really going to cause a huge inflection, and you're going to have the price of gold skyrocket. Okay, if you ask me, the price of gold will go up at least 10 times in the next 5 years. Okay, and that's a barest minimum if you ask me. Okay, maybe even much, much higher than that. So I'll end it here and I'll take questions.
Thank you very much for this quite
well understood things and all. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. And like I've explained, now we are going to have a sort of an interactive things. My request is please wait to get a mic before you ask, because all our Zoom and YouTube people can also able to hear your question.
So what's the situation in India in terms of debt and
interest rate cuts, and so on.
So I was having lunch with a few of your colleagues, and I said I don't want to talk about India. It's just way too controversial a topic. If you read through my book, I kind of lay out how you should look at the finances of a country. Okay, and I started with a base case which is a US dollar. Had I written a book about the rupee, it's extremely difficult to extrapolate from the rupee to the dollar. Okay, but since I've explained the most broadest case, which is a US dollar, you can easily understand what is happening to the Indian situation. So I would suggest that you actually read the book to understand what will happen to India. But to answer in brief, if you look at the debt of the US, of actually our government, it has skyrocketed. Okay, and okay, and what do you think are our biggest imports?
Oil, energy mainly.
Okay, oil and gold. Okay, and the price of this is going to skyrocket. Okay, how about the biggest exports? What are our biggest exports? Yeah, software services, pharma. And we do to which country? USA. Right, so our exports are going to collapse and our imports are going to skyrocket. Okay, you can do the maths after that.
So my question is basically you told there's a bubble burst going to happen. So what is the housing bubble burst you mean to say that? In
I
that?
didn't understand your question.
No, you told that in
Are
recent
you
years.
asking what housing bubble means?
Yeah.
Okay, housing bubble means the prices of houses will collapse. If you actually look at what happened in 2008, after the bubble peaked in 2007, the prices came down by about 40%. Okay, from that HP1 that up till this Q4 2011, okay, that was the bottoming part. Okay, prices had come down by almost 40%. So that's what will happen. I think this time is going to be a greater than 40% decline. Yeah, yes, sir.
Physics, most catastrophes are subdued by damping.
By
damping. Damping means friction. So isn't there any equivalent of friction which stops catastrophes?
Yeah, actually, like it's a beautiful question. If you look at what happened in 1929, okay, in the US, okay, you had a very similar situation. You had a bubble that was inflated by the Federal Reserve at that point in time. It was called the Roaring 20s. And incidentally, as and when you have the bubbles, people are euphoric. People are saying, oh, we have great leaders and we have a booming economy. It's only when the burst happens, people realize that everything is because of monetary inflation and absolutely nothing to do with what is happening in the country as a growth. Right? Now, as and when the bubble burst in 1929, the US was on the gold standard. Okay, so they couldn't do much. Okay, they couldn't inflate more. Okay, so the crisis actually didn't get out of hand. But they intervened in other means. That is the reason why the crisis was so long. Had they not intervened at all, okay, this bust would have happened very fast. We had a very similar bubble in 1920. Okay, at that time we had a US president who absolutely understood what is happening, and that bubble had actually formed because of World War I funding. At that point, the supply of money had actually grown up dramatically. But he said, look, this bubble is actually because we had printed so much money. And if I stop this, okay, this will go away. So that crisis happened just for a year. And everything got sorted out within a year. In fact, there's a beautiful book called The Unheard of Depression of 1920. And that got solved within a year because the government did nothing. Government did not intervene in the physical markets. The government did not intervene in the power, actually by printing money. And so the markets adjusted very fast. So as long as the government doesn't intervene to do things, okay, markets adjust fast. So that is the way. But I don't think we're going to have a situation where the markets won't. I don't think we'll have a situation where the governments will not intervene. I mean, we have given them the power to intervene. So they'll do all things possible under the sun.
Can you go to slide 16, please? Just next two slides.
16,
No, 16. Here, the you are showing that there will be, every time there is this crisis, there will going to be a war. So
Correct.
they will definitely start war somewhere or the other on a much bigger scale to avoid.
Correct. See, okay, the question is, as and when there's a crisis, there is a war. Or when we have, I mean, think of a local politician, right? I mean, he would have messed up something. And if he wants to divert if he wants to divert the attention of people, what will he do? I mean, he'll just engineer a local caste conflict or something of the sort. Okay, then people will stop talking about this and then they'll start talking about that. And the US government just does that on the scale of the world, that's all. They want to divert the attention away from the US dollar onto other things. So they'll just engineer as many conflicts as possible. But the power of, I don't think the other countries will support the US today. Especially if you look at countries in Europe, okay, they are pretty much fed up. So US is going to be alone, and the other countries don't have as big a crisis as the US has. So the support of US is going to be very minimal. The support the US gets is going to be very minimal.
See, and can you go to 8, slide number 8?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, here also that wherever there is this GDP that you talked about for the, for India's case, right now our GDP is increasing and all these, in comparison, I'm talking about.
Okay.
So, can you also make comment with respect to China on this? Because China you have not talked about.
No, China.
Yes.
Okay, this is for the US. Okay, see, I'll talk about China in brief. That country is actually going through a housing bust as we speak. Okay, they had a bigger housing bubble than the US had. Okay, but at this particular point in time, the Chinese government is not interfering and they're just allowing the housing markets to crash. The way the country is going to dominate the world in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is going to be unprecedented. Okay, US had something like about 80% of the world's manufacturing capabilities in the 1950s and 60s. That's a peak of the US, if you ask me. They had 60% of the world's manufacturing capability, right? China is going to dominate in a far superior fashion. Okay, like no other country has actually ever done before, if you ask me. So that's a part of China. About India, if you look at the debt, if you go to the site of PGurus and then type my name, I've written a series of articles and I've written a few things about India and you can read through it. India's debt has also skyrocketed. Okay, so to say that the government is managing well, all that is not true at all. If you look at the physical deficit as a percentage of the GDP at this particular point in time, it's actually 5%. That's an unacceptably high number, especially when the government is claiming we are growing at 8%, etc., etc. When you are growing at 8%, why do you need a 5%? I mean, even in the Keynesian economics, which is a very flawed theory, they said if you're not growing, then you can do deficit spending. When you claim you're actually growing at 8%, why do you need a 5% deficit? It's just unacceptable. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So this is also about China. From your presentation, it appeared that when the central monetary controlling agency or policy making agency, they allow the market to adjust whatever instabilities there are. Then instabilities die down faster, things are better,
Correct.
and there are these no large-scale oscillations, so to say. Now, if we look at the politics of China, so pretty much everything is centrally controlled. I do not know how their monetary policy is, whether that is centrally controlled or market-driven. So if they're doing well, how they're doing well, or if they're not doing well, where they're not doing well, and so on. So it's like even more controlled, centrally controlled than USA.
So that's a very good question. Okay, but in the case of China, I would make two distinctions. If you look at the political side of things, it is very tightly controlled. But when you look at the business side of things, the operational freedom that the businesses have there it's just extreme. You can talk to like any company that actually does business there as compared to business in India. They have extremely high levels of autonomy. There's very little government interference. So from that particular perspective, as a business, I think China today is more capitalistic than the US. Okay, the part where China is actually messing up is that they still actually do a lot of this centrally planned capital allocations. So the huge housing bubble that you had in China, okay, was because the government was actually diverting a lot of credit to the housing sector. Had they not done that, okay, they have done much better in the all other sectors without having housing bust. I think they're learning the lessons, and they'll do less of this centralized capital allocation going forward. Okay, but the political autonomy, I don't think that's it. I mean, that's going to happen in China ever, and that's a sad thing, right? People should have the freedom and the liberty, but yeah, I mean, you can't have everything you want in life, I guess. So.
So what do you suggest to the Indian investor today? Should we sell our houses and buy gold?
See, buy gold. See, houses have never been an investment excepting for the last 40, 50 years. People never thought of house as an investment. It's a place where you live. It is this extreme monetary cycle that we have had since the 1980s that has made people think of houses as an investment. Okay, what has happened from 1980s to 2022? Interest rates were on a downward cycle. Interest rates were at 22% in the US, okay, like in the year 1980. From 22, like it came down to zero. It almost felt like a straight line, right? This is the reason why people started thinking of houses as an investment. It is not an investment, it's a place where you live. Okay, okay, that's a first part. Second is, I mean, gold is an absolute blind buy, if you ask me. If you should sell your house to buy gold, that you should ask your wife, you shouldn't ask me.
I agree, and then you will end up. So, any other questions? Yeah, is there any audience has here a question? Then I'll go to some.
Yes, sir. In 2008, there was this Keynesian recovery, right, in US?
Correct, ma'am.
So is there any plan of, or can they afford a second Keynesian 2.0 kind of a thing, or are they attempting something? Or?
No, 2008?
In the Great Depression, Keynesian economy was put in place, right, to revive.
Keynesian economics, yeah. See, thank you, ma'am. This solution that we adopted, that the world adopted after 2008, it appears to have worked, right? We had a huge bubble, okay, that had burst, and then the central banks actually printed trillions and trillions of dollars across the world. Then the world economy appears to have stabilized. Now, if it had stabilized, we won't be having a bubble today. They have just replaced one bubble with a bigger bubble. Okay, that is all they have done. And stability is you have actually ensure that the economy is able to stand on its own without any monetary support. Today, the US is not able to withstand a 5% interest rates. I mean, why did they cut day before yesterday? Right? Okay, that is because that is because the federal government is bankrupt. Okay, they have a massive housing bubble, and the US banks are in huge trouble today. Okay, so all they have managed after 2008 was to replace the 2008 housing bubble, okay, with a 2024 stocks, bonds, real estate bubble. So they didn't replace the solution. It was an illusion, that's all.
You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, excellent colloquium. I'm sorry I missed to attend in person. I have a couple of questions. One is that this again, all of them are about India. So how do other thinkers, economists or otherwise planners, etc. in India, feel about your theory? namely that this what is going to kind of happen. Did you were you able to kind of glean some kind of concurrence or any difference of opinion about these? Of course, logical.
No, I think this is a question you should ask them. You should not ask me. Okay. As to whether they agree with me, I don't think they agree at all. Had they remotely believed in what I'm talking about, which is to have a limited government sound money, okay, we won't be running a 5% deficit. We will not be running a 5% deficit at a time when they claim we have an 8% growth. So they are still operating under the broken Keynesian economic model. As to when will they realize? I think we have to wait for a crash. I don't think they're going to realize it before the crash. Have I sent my book details to them? Yes, I have sent, but I have not heard back from them.
Oh, just a follow-up on that. I mean, I didn't really mean that the government or government agencies will agree or disagree with your theory. I'm not talking about that. I'm actually talking about your peers and your, let us say, the experts in the field who have nothing to do with government, just like you. So whether or not, what do they, I didn't even say whether they agree or disagree, but what do they feel about this? So it's in the kind of sphere that most of us work, we also try to kind of see what our peers say about the work that we have done, and it gets validated, not validated. Sometimes even disagreement leads to a better understanding of the subject and so on. I was asking completely on that academic perspective.
Okay, got a question. Now, if you look at the forwards to my book, it's been written by two people. Okay, Doug Casey and then Mark Faber. I'm sure you would have heard the name of Mark Faber. He's a very famous investment guy. Okay, and he called my book as an outstanding read. Okay, the first person, Doug Casey, he was a former VP candidate in the US. So he's not a normal guy. And these guys don't do favors. And I've written something extraordinarily controversial. And he said my book is very, very good. Then there's another person, and you can go and look up for this name, the person by the name of Bob Moriarty. He said this is the best book on gold he has ever read. And that guy is a very, very critical writer. He'll trash books when he doesn't like them. And he himself has written multiple books on this particular topic. And he said my book is the best he has read. I can ask Parag sir to share the link with you people about what he wrote about my book. So people who subscribe to this Austrian School of Economics, okay, they think, okay, my book is absolutely great. Others think I'm an idiot. Okay, we'll just wait for time to see who's correct.
Okay. If I can ask the second question, Parag. This is a more on a lighter vein. And also, to some extent, this was alluded to. So, going by your prediction that this is what is going to happen, and gold is going to sell at 24,000 US dollars per an ounce and so on. If you were the economic financial planner of this country, what do you suggest to the government to do next 6 to 10 years?
Are you talking about India?
Yes, of course, India.
Oh, if you look at Argentina, okay, they have a president by the name of Javier Milei. Okay, he subscribed to this school of thought. Okay, you can look at what he's doing in Argentina. Argentina had extremely high rates of inflation, upwards of 100% for several years in a row. He came and within 6 months, he just stabilized everything. And what did he do? He just balanced the budgets. That's all he did. I mean, he just cut down all kinds of subsidies. And within 6 months, inflation came down to zero. It's going to be the fastest growing place in the country. It's going to be the fastest country in the world in terms of growth. So if you're looking for a place to invest other than China, I would suggest that you go to Argentina. In terms of India, what would I do? I would just balance the budgets on day one. I mean, that is an absolute given. That's the first thing I'll do. Number two, I'll get rid of the income tax. Okay. Number three, all this cross subsidization that happens from states, I would stop that. If you look at it, a few states that are doing very well, okay, they are paying an extraordinarily large percentage of the federal government expenses, and the states that are doing poorly, like UP, Bihar, they are getting more than 100% of the revenues that they give. This is a very odd system. You are penalizing people who are actually doing well. and you're subsidizing people who are doing poorly, right? You can take an extremely large share from the southern states or wherever they're doing well, but no state should actually get more than 100% of what they are giving. And that is a recipe for disaster. You are just you're creating an incentive for all sorts of malpractices to happen. So these are the three things I'll do. I'll first balance the budgets, get rid of income tax, and actually stop this cross subsidization that happens.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Shanmuganathan. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Is there any other questions here? Yeah, please. After you, I will take a question myself, and then we'll have a break.
Thanks. The way I understand it is that you need some kind of mechanism that you cannot arbitrarily grow in amount that underpins what you call value. So, for example, gold, you cannot just increase the amount of gold you have. So that's why the gold standard was much better than currency that you can print at will. So in the same logic, do you think like something other than gold, for example, nowadays Bitcoin, will be of value or will emerge as valuable in future?
So I'd explain this here. Okay, so the point about gold is this: even when the world was on a gold standard, okay, the governments, the kings, the government, they hated the gold standard. Okay, we did not go to a gold standard because the governments wanted it. We went there because the governments did not have a choice, okay, but to accept gold as money. If you actually see the Roman history, at that time they had gold and salt operating as money. So the government used to pay the peasants with salt, okay, but the soldiers never accepted salt. So the government did not have a choice but to pay them with gold. Okay, so gold was not the choice of the government; it was despite the government that gold became money. Okay, now why did wheat actually become the first form of money? Okay, that is because a person who accepts wheat, as when he sells something, he knows that others will accept, or in the worst case, he can use it himself. There is a consumer utility to these goods. Same is the case with iron and copper, and same is the case with gold and silver. There is tremendous utility to gold and silver. Okay, now we have about 6 billion ounces of gold in the world. If instead of having 6, we had 60 billion ounces of gold, instead of having copper wires, we'll be having gold wires, right? They just transmit electricity so fluently, right? It is a scarcity of gold, okay, that is actually limiting its application in the industry, right? So there is a wide variety of applications, and it is this desirability that made gold as money. Now, what can you do with Bitcoin? Nothing. You can't do anything with it. Why should it be money?
Blockchain and so on.
I mean, blockchain is a fantastic, absolutely fantastic technology. I'm not questioning that. But what can you do with a Bitcoin? There's nothing that you can do with it. I mean, there's no utility to it. There's no consumer utility to it. There's a huge price to it. Okay. But that's a figment of imagination of the people. Price and value are two different things. At some point, Bitcoin will come down to its intrinsic worth, if you ask me. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it'll come down.
Thank you very much for that. I have a question for you, or rather a slightly larger thing. So I personally subscribe to your theory about US dollar is heading for a disaster and things like that. I'm more interested in how can we forecast this? I mean, you said it may happen within next 3 to 4 years. My personal belief is this may happen within next 2 years. So are there indicators you would say like a canary in a gold mine, like sort of a early warning system? Okay, now this has started to happen. And people can take impact from that. I mean, I don't want to go sell my house today and buy gold, but after a year, I can see actually is happening and it is going to be advantageous to invest in a gold rather than in real estate. So what kind of canary in a gold mine or early warning system you would say? I have some ideas about those, and I can say maybe the bankers' paychecks and all right now because of the funny money, the banker or the investor bankers, they have maybe 20 times or 30 times productivity to salary they get. I mean, they do nothing but manipulate money around,
money, right,
and they get easy paychecks. So should we look out for those? And when the big American banks started to go down, we can assume that this is the canary in the gold
So-
mine.
So thanks for your question. I mean, you're asking me, like when should you start preparing? And the answer is actually yesterday. Okay. So there is no way to predict exactly when it's going to happen with certainty. And when it becomes obvious to you, it might become obvious to the market as well. So, okay. So the best time to act is when others are not acting, and that is today, if not yesterday. So I think we're way past the time when this ought to happen. It should have happened at least 3, 4, 5 years back. Okay, but I don't see it prolonging beyond a year or two. 2 years is the max I would give. But don't push your luck, don't finesse.
Any other questions? Thank for a very I hope that everybody felt that it was worth the time which is spent. And thank him again for coming here. And
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And I have shared the link to his books and other things through the email also. So, it's very interesting now.